AltElxn 2025 is a national election series airing on campus and community radio stations across Canada, bringing you diverse voices, in-depth conversations, and perspectives that are often unheard. The initiative is supported by the Covering Canada Elections 2025 Fund. Tune in live on April 28th for our election night coverage and visit AltElxn.ca for more information.
Good afternoon and welcome to AltElxn 2025, your alternative source for election coverage. I'm Ryan Funk with CHEB-FM and Multicultural. I'll be your guide through everything you need to know for the upcoming federal election here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. On Monday, April 28th, Canadians will head to the polls for the 45th general election. And guess what? Over 7.3 million electors have already cast their ballots during advanced polling. Democracy in action. Let's dive into what's shaping this election with some political insight from Multicultural's very own executive director, Taya Risheva.
It's official. Elections Canada just released the final election expenses limits for the upcoming federal election on Monday, April 28th. These spending limits apply to all registered political parties and confirmed candidates across the country. The amounts are calculated based on the greater of either the preliminary or revised list of electors. So what does that mean in numbers? Well, in this election, there are 343 electoral districts following the redistribution exercise completed in 2023. That means more candidates, more ridings, and yes, more money in play. For political parties, national spending limits are in the tens of millions of dollars. For example, in the 2021 election, the national party limit was over $30 million for some parties, while this year's totals vary by party and population in each riding. The limits are designed to ensure fairness and transparency in campaign spending. At the riding level, individual candidates also face strict limits, usually in the range of $90,000 to $120,000 per candidate, depending on the size and population of the district. These rules aren't just guidelines, they're written into the Canadian Elections Act and enforced to maintain a level playing field for all parties and candidates. Elections Canada, that oversees our democratic process, emphasizes that these measures are in place to keep elections fair, open, and accountable. The full breakdown of expenses limit is available now at elections.ca. Stay informed and make your plan to vote on April 28.
But what are candidates saying? Let's head over to Winnipeg South Centre, where Cam Scott is running under the Communist Party of Canada. Cam's aiming to team up with other progressive voices in Parliament, with one goal at the top of his list: disrupting the status quo on housing.
Cam, thank you so much for coming in. The election's on the way. I guess for the people here in Winnipeg who are going to be voting, why did you want to get into politics? Let's start there.
That's a great question. I grew up in Winnipeg around spaces that are sadly no longer with us, of great importance, like the A-Zone, the radical space on Albert Street there. And so much of my political education was received from a really rich left ecology. I think that what gave me the definitive push into politics was a spell of union organizing, working to unionize a bookstore that I worked at under some duress and very patiently. And since then, I have been quite active in work around police accountability and also movements for peace and disarmament and Cuba solidarity and so on. So it began in a terribly local way that concerned my own circumstances of work and living and was only enlarged from there.
Going in at the federal level, you'll be working with a lot of different individuals in a lot of different parties. How do you work across those party lines if you are elected to get things you feel are important to Winnipeg and Manitobans out onto that federal level?
Yeah, certainly the Communist Party is, I don't need to tell you, a very small party. We're the second oldest party in the country and have had a very important role to play in the building of the trade union movement and in the initiation of employment insurance and projects that are as yet unfinished today. They need to be expanded still. And we didn't do those alone. We were part then of mass movements. And likewise, when we think about those communists that have been elected to parliament in the past and to many other levels of government, we know that we can't do it alone. We would love to participate in what we call a progressive bloc of other left-wing parliamentarians. That would be the left of the NDP and the left of the Green Party and so on. And we could work with many other people on advancing some of the ideas that I believe are our signal contribution to this election and to Canadian politics in general. But I think that the communist contribution to that progressive milieu would be quite singular, because we also, because of our size and because of our history, we have the ability to say things that other parties are simply not able to.
So is that part of the reason why you wanted to be part of the Communist Party, that freedom to say things that, maybe doesn't fall within the lines of the other parties? Because, when you're going in a smaller party, you don't necessarily have the name recognition that you would of a Liberal Party, the NDP, or the PCs.
Absolutely, yes. We are not so much part of the standard political brokerage. The Communist Party has a very long tradition, again, of work in the peace movements and the trade unions, and our focus isn't strictly electoral. So we're often knocking on people's doors and they say, I didn't know that Canada had a Communist Party. And we have to, give the little history lesson on the spot. But at the same time, we're active elsewhere every day in between elections. So what drew me to the Communist Party specifically was the intensity of work, again, within the labor movement and within the broad movement for peace and disarmament and so on. And then every 4 years there's an election, and we have this chance to talk to people about what we're otherwise doing every day. So it's partly that we can make a terribly uncompromised contribution to the political discourse around an election year, but also that it's a site of work every other day, and we're really in the people's struggles. Yeah.
While he acknowledges the pressures of strategic voting, Scott urges voters to follow their convictions and consider real alternatives this election. Now, shifting gears, here in Winnipeg, we have a vibrant and growing Ukrainian diaspora, many of whom may be voting in a Canadian federal election for the first time. Multicultural journalist Yulia Kovalenko sat down with the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress Manitoba to hear what those new voters are thinking.
Чи є в української громади спільна стратегія, за кого голосувати? Чи голосуємо кожен, як вважає за потрібне, кожен за себе?
Взагалі, громада є дуже велика, правда? І я думаю, що всі політичні думки від правої до лівої і так далі, все посередині, ви можете знайти людей, які мають різні політичні думки. То сказати, що громада якось має як блок голосувати, є неможливо. І я знаю, що Конгрес українців Канади на кожні вибори висилає по партіях такий запитник, де вони по певних питань питають, що ті партії хочуть, або яка їхня позиція, становище партії по яку-небудь таке питання. То можна знайти легко на сайті Конгресу, www.ucc.ca, і там буде щось election survey. І кожна партія посилає свої відповіді на ці питання. Там багато, там щось 6-7 сторінок питань, там є досить чіткі опитання. Ну, добре. Я знаю, що Конгрес закликає членів громади, щоб вони на то подивилися, і тоді, приймали якесь рішення особисто. Конгрес, я думаю, би не міг нікому коли казати, як голосувати, то би було, я думаю, навіть антидемократично, по-перше, і українці не люблять слухати людей взагалі, чиновників, то вони б робили, як вони хотіли, все ж таке. То ліпше є тільки піти на той сайт, побачити, що і тоді прийти до своєї власне вирішення, як має людина голосувати.
А з якими основними викликами стикається українська громада в Канаді сьогодні? Які теми, на вашу думку, найбільше цікавлять українців?
Окей, знову це питання. Є 1,3 мільйон людей українського походження. Третє, четверте, п'яте покоління, ми можемо сказати, має суто такі канадські проблеми і питання, які вони хочуть, щоб уряд чи політичні партії вирішили на цих виборах. Значить, новоприбулі, ті, що приїхали за останні 3-5 років, мають інше бачення. На жаль, вони не можуть голосувати. Але, скажімо, організації чи люди, що цікавляться як допомагати іммігрантам, як допомагати новоприбулим, то як ви сказали, ці питання навколо роботи, імміграційне питання, як дістати той PR, чи можна, як податися. Це питання з work permit. Знову, 300 тисяч українців приїхали до Канади за останні 3 роки. Багато з них тепер мають кінчаються їхні work permits, вони не знають, як піти далі, що станеться з їхнім PR-ом, як кажуть. Я думаю, що є що Конгрес і інші українці цікавіться, хочуть якимось способом дістати відповідь від політичних партій, що вони з цим феноменом зроблять, правда? Бо це є велике питання, це такі людські проблеми, як допомагати окремим людям, як вони мають прожити, як вони планувати своє життя. То я знаю, що багато є розмови по всіляких форумах і на Фейсбуках і так далі, і ставить питання, що така партія буде робити про безробіття, що така партія буде робити, і найголовніше є з цими імміграційними питаннями. Люди вже тут 3 роки були, вже 4-й, 5-й, 6-й рік, що зробити. І також є така цікава проблема в Канаді, що розділ обов'язків, правда, федеральний уряд, певні такі речі, що воно має відповідати за, наприклад, імміграцію, провінційний уряд має інші. То дуже часто на виборах до федерального уряду ці питання ніколи не будуть вирішені, бо це справді відповідальність провінційного уряду. І це є така часом люди не розуміють, що різні рівні адміністрації мають інші ролі і інші відповідальності. Але все ж таки, я думаю, що це питання навколо імміграційне є таке питання номер 1, від того всього інше йде. Тоді для всіх канадців є питання безробіття, для всіх канадців є питання житла і нічого такого унікальне. Тепер питання номер 1 і все є підтримка України. Як Канада може підтримувати Україну? І ми мусимо сказати, що українці, майже всі канадські партії, принаймні так публічно, вони однаково є, що засуджують Росію за агресію, кажуть, що Україна має отримувати допомогу. Як то буде виглядати, кожна партія може трошки інакше ставитися, чи то є такий великий пріоритет для партії А, як то партія Б, ми то побачимо в кінці. Але громада і виборців на тим мають ставити тиск на уряд на майбутнє, як вони мають допомагати Україні.
Thanks, Yulia. Now, what's buzzing online? Let's check in again with Taya to see what's trending on social media and how Stats Canada is tracking national concerns.
So how does this year's coverage stack up against 2021? Back then, media focused heavily on pandemic-related issues like vaccine mandates and economic relief. Ethnocultural media tackled voter education for newcomers, but their reach was limited by less sophisticated digital strategies. Indigenous media covered residential school apologies, especially after the discovery of unmarked graves, but lacked the multilingual resources we see today. In 2025, the tone has shifted. Traditional media driving deeper into local issues like Manitoba's opioid crisis and infrastructure funding, while ethnocultural and indigenous media have embraced digital platforms. Coverage is also more inclusive. AltElxn Canada's materials are available in over a dozen of indigenous languages compared to just a few in 2021. Another difference is the response to misinformation. In 2021, AltElxn Canada faced rumors about pencil-marked ballots and non-citizen voting, which spread on social media. This year, Chief Electoral Officer has proactively engaged platforms like X and TikTok to curb disinformation. Manitoba's media, especially Indigenous and ethnocultural outlets, are countering fake news by sharing verified voting information. A step up from 2021 reactive approach. Social media is a driving force in election coverage, with X, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook leading the charge. X remain the go-to for real-time political debates, with Manitoba users posting about candidate events and policy critiques. TikTok has surged in popularity, especially among younger voters, with short videos explaining voting processes or satirizing candidates. Instagram is a key for visual campaigns like AltElxn Canada Indigenous Voter Toolkit, while Facebook is widely used by ethnocultural communities for sharing multilingual election guides. Now let's talk about the hot-button issues Canadians are debating online. Based on posts across X and reports from major outlets, 3 topics stand out. First, foreign interference as a major concern. Second, misinformation is rampant. Media noted a rise in sophisticated fake content, with over a quarter of Canadians exposed. On TikTok, false claims about voter ID requirement have gone viral, prompting Elections Canada to post clarifications. Third, Indigenous issues, particularly reconciliation and resource rights. Ex-users in Manitoba are debating candidates' stances on clean water, land rights, with some accusing parties of empty promises. Indigenous media are amplifying these discussions, calling for accountability. Compared to 2021, when vaccine mandates dominated, 2025's debates are more diverse and heated, reflecting growing polarization noted in Elections Canada public opinion research. For more information, visit elections.ca or follow Manitoba's local media for updates. I'm Tyre Tisheva. Stay informed and get out to vote.
From inflation to housing, the cost of living is top of mind. Over in Winnipeg Centre, Green Party candidate Gary Gervais is pushing for major investments in public housing, with a strong stance on keeping nonprofit housing affordable and out of the hands of big investors.
When we're looking at the Green Party, a lot of people hear, oh, green, that must be tied to environmentalism. And that's an important conversation that is going along, I think, for many households about climate change and carbon neutrality. So when we're looking at the Green Party's platform, what are those conversations surrounding, environmentalism, conservation, as well as building the Canadian economy while reaching that net zero?
Yeah, so you're right. The environment is the core for the Green Party, even though we have a robust platform in all areas. But I think the premise of your question is, part of the problem is that environment and economy have been set up as an either-or proposition, and it can be both. But more importantly, the problem is the way we do the economy. It's largely reduced to a GDP number, and GDP doesn't factor in whether something's good or bad for us on social levels. So a place that's going to have amazing GDP growth next year is California, because they had wildfires. There's going to be lots of growth in California. That's not good growth, but on GDP numbers, that's going to look good. The Greens are pushing the concept that we need to do economics differently. And that's using regenerative economic model, or some theories call it a donut economic, where you have limits on certain kinds of growth, and you factor in the fact that some growth is bad, right? Like burning fossil fuels is good for GDP because we sell more oil, but it pollutes and destroys our climate. So we need a more nuanced approach to economics is really the key to all of this. It's not an either or, it's we have to do economics differently.
When it comes to environmentalism, part of that conversation also ties into Indigenous rights and reconciliation. For the Green Party, what are those conversations and platforms in terms of involving Indigenous nations into the conversations about environmentalism, but as well as development and conservation?
Yeah, and I think the key, and the Greens have been talking about this for decades. When I ran in 2006, this was a key component of their platform, was that we need to follow, it's not involving Indigenous, it's actually following them, because they have concepts like 7 generations. They're considering what's going to happen 7 generations from now. And it's really taking us away from our current, quarterly profits and, what's happening this quarter compared to next quarter. And It's actually a long-term approach, and I think we have a lot to learn. So it's not just about involving them, it's actually about following their lead.
And then another part of that is housing, whether that is in First Nations communities, but here in Winnipeg, people can see those who are struggling. So when we're looking at the housing crisis of, getting people off the street and for people to afford housing, how do you address the growing demand for housing as well as the rising rates of, rent?
Yeah, so Greens have a couple of positions in their platform that address that. One is specifically on affordable housing and developing more public housing. And most importantly with that is getting the commitment that public housing stays public. I can give a real specific example. My mother used to manage a seniors apartment building. It wasn't assisted living or anything. It was just an apartment building for seniors, but it was nonprofit housing. And so the rents were quite low. But when the mortgage expired on that property, then it became possible for the requirements of nonprofit housing kind of disappeared, and it could be sold to a multinational that was just looking for an 8% return on their investment. And that's a key concrete example I've seen in my life where that was great nonprofit housing that kept rents low for seniors, and it just disappeared because if we had the proper policy in place, that wouldn't have happened. So examples like this, the Green Party also wants to invest in public housing, the most since we've done since the 1970s. And the other piece to it is to bring in a guaranteed livable income where everyone is entitled to a certain amount of income, and once you sort of level that playing field, then people can afford housing, people can get into housing. So not exactly a housing policy, but really ties into affordable housing.
And then, that also ties into cost of living and inflation. So what are some strategies for, finding solutions to this challenge?
This kind of goes back to the regenerative economics idea, where the key problem with the environment is that our models are set up on continuous growth forever. We can't grow the economy forever on a finite planet, right? Some people may argue against that, but the reality is the more people consume, the more resources we use, the worse the environment is. It seems like natural physics. And in that model, there will always be continuous inflation. So it'll always challenge the people at the bottom end until we change that model. And that's not an easy task because the whole world's following that. But when you get, we can do as much as we can in Canada, but as long as the world keeps following this model of continuous growth, there really is no hope for the planet. When you look at a country, and I'm not picking on India, but they recently came out with a pronouncement that they want to increase their GDP from 3 trillion to 30 trillion, or 3.5 trillion to 30 trillion.
What changes would you like to see in the future
by the year
after
2050.
election?
So that's nearly 10 times as much GDP. What does that mean? 10 times as much consumption.
What changes would you
Canada's
like to see
GDP is only
in the
2.1
future
million
after the
to
election?
2.1 trillion.
That truly understands and
It'll
represents
dwarf
the
anything we're
interests
doing in
of
Canada
Winnipeg
if
community.
other countries aren't
What changes would you like to see
doing
in the
anything about
future
the
after
environment.
election?
Again, I'm not picking on India, just using
the
one example
elections?
where the
Can I
growth
do
model is
after-
so
okay, well,
baked
maybe
in
again.
that
What changes would you like to see in the
we
future
really
after
don't
the
have hope
elections?
unless we change the entire model.
Now, let's head back to the streets with Yulia, who spoke with everyday Winnipeggers to hear what they care about most this election.
What issues matter most to you when choosing a party or candidate?
The Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Education and healthcare.
Taking care of the below even minimum wage people and the old people. I need all the help I can get.
Probably cost of living, and that's pretty important right now. And like home ownership is pretty impossible for a lot of people right now, and that stuff like that, and the cost of fuel and everything, and like pack of steaks at Costco is like $100, stuff like that.
Most of the thing is hellas and work, like jobs. That's most important.
Well, I don't like Trump and his tariffs, and we got to stop that.
Do you think there is a political party that truly understands and represents the interests of Winnipeg community?
Yes, Liberal Party. Well, you need a strong leader to stand up to Donald Trump, and he knows finances. I think he'd represent Canada well.
The closest would be either the Green Party or the NDP.
The Liberal Party, because they do a lot of things that's to help people like, in hellas and the issues I am looking for, like work. That's what I concern more. And they are doing their best.
Geez, that's a tough one. I would go either Liberal or NDP.
What changes would you like to see in the future after election?
Just a lower cost of living in general for everybody, food more affordable. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just less taxes. It seems like the Liberals want to introduce a lot more taxes if they get into power again. And they've already been in power for a very long time. So I just think it's the time for a change for the country.
I would like to see ideology removed from the charter and go back to a law-based charter.
I'd like to see more affordable housing. I would like to see a drop in the grocery prices and good education, maybe less students in the classroom. And healthcare is a big one too. Emergency wait times are still too long.
Well, it is one thing I needed to see is some change in the minimum wages because there's a lot of poverty going on. So we need that to be changed, at least to give something, because too much shortage of housing, too much of low-income people suffering. So we need that to recover that one and create jobs for them too at the same time.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining the Multicultural team for your AltElxn 2025 coverage. Want more insights? Head over to u-channel.ca and make sure to tune in live on April 28th for real-time election coverage on altelxn.ca. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and above all, go vote.
AltElxn 2025 is a national election series airing on campus and community radio stations across Canada, bringing you diverse voices, in-depth conversations, and perspectives that are often unheard. The initiative is supported by the Covering Canada Elections 2025 Fund. Tune in live on April 28th for our election night coverage and visit altelxn.ca for more information.